Welcome back to the Corner of Story and Game, your podcast that lives at the intersection of game design and storytelling. Today we're joined by two incredible storytellers from the world of game design, Winter Mullenix and Tormod MacLean. Winter is a returning guest, a narrative designer and writer known for her work in online games. Tormod is a veteran narrative designer whose credits include work with PUBG Corporation and EVE Online. Together, they've faced the daunting challenge of building stories not just for a single hero, but for communities of players, each with their own goals, agencies, and erratic behaviors. In this episode, we're talking about what it takes to design narrative for those open, expansive sandbox environments, where world building must withstand chaos, and story lives in the tension between lore and freedom. So let's get into it. Tormod, Winter, thank you for joining me.
Glad to be here. Thank you.
Today, I am lucky enough to get two of you to play with and pick on, but today we're here to talk about world building inside of massive online sandboxes, open sandboxes, big spaces. But before we dig into it, I like to set the stage with your origin story. And we've had Winter here before, but first, Winter, I am going to get you to catch us up to date, what's happened recently, what's going on. And then Tormod, it will be your turn. I want to hear how you fell in love with gaming, writing, how you got into the industry. I want to hear some stories.
Awesome. Well, as you know, I was working as narrative director for Cryptic Studios. I was over Neverwinter, Star Trek Online, and their full roster of titles. But in the end, I ended up, getting laid off in the turmoil that is the industry right now. And I ended up looking at a few other roles, considered a few, but ultimately decided on CCP games in Iceland because I've always felt that, one, Iceland is a place full of stories, and as a writer, that really appeals to me, culturally as well. And two, EVE Online has such a unique and interesting ecosystem from an online game perspective and a narrative perspective that I thought it was the perfect challenge to tackle next. So now I'm lead narrative designer there.
Wow. Did you play EVE before you looked at the role?
I did. The catch-22 here is that when you are working in games, half the time you don't have as much time to play games as you would like. And EVE is a very hefty title. There's a lot of content, a lot you can do. And so working on other MMOs, I didn't really have the time to dedicate to it. So I had not played since, I want to say, 2004. And coming back, it has changed a lot and in a lot of positive ways. And, well, I'm just looking forward to the future now.
Very cool. Okay, well, thank you. Tormod, your turn. Tell us how you fell in love with game and writing.
Right, yes. I mean, so I have older brothers, so I had no choice. I'd been gaming and telling stories since before I have memories. I know, like the old Ghostbusters game on the Amstrad, my brothers would stick me in between them and be like, "You're Slimer," which was not cool because there are 4 Ghostbusters and I only had 2 brothers. I remember we would, like, other kids would play with Transformers and we would take our Transformers and be like, okay, these are the thinking machines of Palanos, and they're having an epic diplomatic concern with the teddy bears that live on the other side of the bedroom. And so, like, world building and storytelling are just things I've done my whole life, but it wasn't something like I knew a path into games or really had any concept that was a job I could have. So I did honestly dozens of different jobs in my life until one day I found myself without work, and my flatmate at the time was a QA tester, now fantastic game designer. Gregor Chalmers works at Hello Games, and he said, "Oh, I think you'd be a good QA, so you should come and have a shot at it." And I did the interview and I instantly fell in love with it and fell in love with working in the games industry. I was just so passionate about it. And it was actually EVE Online at that time I was testing. And I ended up becoming a in-house QA for CCP directly in Iceland, then left to move to Amsterdam to lead a QA team there, working at PUBG. And I was working on a game called Thunder Tier 1, which was a sort of independent title, but released under PUBG. And my testers kept on complaining that there was no text and the story things hadn't been worked out and it was blocking them. And I talked to the head of the game project, and he told me what had happened. I said, well, I could probably write these for you. And luckily at the time, it was COVID, so I didn't have anywhere to go or anything to do. So I ended up doing a bunch of writing for that. He really liked what I did, so I did a bunch more, and eventually I just became the main game writer. And after that title shipped, I was really keen to keep on feeding their urge, a huge passion for narrative design. And I wound up being hired back as CCP, but this time working remotely from the Netherlands. And I've been a narrative designer on it ever since. And it's my dream job. So I feel like a pretty lucky guy.
That is so cool, man. What's your favorite part of working on something as big and as expansive as EVE Online?
Yes. I am in love with the players of EVE Online and the insanity that they can get up to, the things that they do that we don't predict, the ways that the stories that they tell, the depth of interest. That EVE contains every kind of player, from your overly enthusiastic lore nerds to your super hardcore killer gamers, to famously some of the most enthusiastic and organized empire builders in the whole of gaming history. And to tell stories for these people is so delightful. And sometimes it's like being a journalist. Sometimes it's like being a games master. It's never dull.
So cool. Reading some of the stories that make it into mainstream media, the big stories about like corporate espionage and people who work their ways into some of those guilds in order to just turn at the right moment. Some of those stories are incredible. And to understand that they thousands of players organically make those stories happen, that must be incredible.
Yeah, I met a man who did that at a player meetup once, and he had some real stories to tell. The dedication of time, it took years of playing alongside people before finally revealing history about us. Well, it's just this.
No doubt. All right, well, let's dig into the core topic of the day. So we're going to start with you, my friend. In your opinion, what makes narrative design inside of sandboxes or MMOs fundamentally different than traditional linear storytelling? And Winter, jump in, help out, you can back and forth. Let's set the stage by defining the difference here.
Yes, so this is a really interesting topic, and obviously something me and Winter spent a lot of time talking about. I think the way I would define it would be like, it's the difference between building a dollhouse and designing Lego blocks. You know, we do create, linear short form narratives and things within the story. We create external narratives and short stories we put out to build the world. But one of our big goals, I think, in terms of how we build the world is to create a background for players and options for them. They can then go off and do whatever exciting things they want to do. And then we try to be as responsive as possible to that, or to design content in such a way that it gives them agency, and then have that make real lasting impacts and changes whenever we can on the nature of the world, on what it's shaped like.
Winter?
I agree. I think that there is a big difference in how you approach explicit and implicit storytelling when it comes to this sort of game, because you want the players to be able to tell their stories. You don't want to police or dictate exactly what they're able to do. So you need to leave the world open enough for them to have their experiences, bring their head canon into the official canon, and have a comprehensive and immersive experience. Whereas in a lot of games, the world is very defined and you're having people make characters with very limited sort of paths to walk down. This is not that. EVE has a wide open universe where people can literally do what they want to do. And it's a matter of building the world around that, rather than saying, no, this is what it is. It's saying this is all the implicit storytelling. Here are some explicit parts. Take the stage.
Very cool. Very cool. Okay. Well, I guess as a writer, traditionally you think of writers as somebody who is crafting a linear story, at least to people who are not familiar with narrative designers. So maybe let's touch on that quickly. In the space of an MMO or sandbox, where there's this large world, what is a narrative designer's role in that space? And I think you've outlined a lot of it, but let's kind of just bring it home so that people understand the difference between planting seeds as opposed to paving a road.
Yeah, I think one of the main things we're doing is just creating an environment. It's similar to like writing a D&D module, I think, in some ways, and that you want to be like, hey, there's all these things sort of going on. I mean, I say to people, you know, when we say EVE Online is a game about spaceships, it's like, yeah, sure, but the spaceships are a fantasy. You are sitting in their home, you're watching your screen, and well, we and all the other departments, our incredible art department, a wonderful community team, all the other fantastic system designers are trying to do is to create the sense of being in this epic, super advanced science fiction locale. And I think that fantasy that we foster for players allows them to fully invest themselves in the world that they then help build.
Very cool.
Very true. I think narrative design in an MMO space is very much about the characters that you create, projecting yourself into those characters. One of the challenges that spacefaring games in general tend to face is that human empathy tends to focus very heavily on the expressions and interactions of actual humans. And when you extrapolate and you're looking at a ship, how do you still make an intrinsically human experience? How do you study the human possibilities and the human potential within that? How do you allow people to express themselves? So narrative design for this sort of game is about making sure that people have the tools to express themselves, have the tools to do what they want to do, and have the tools to put it together in a way that makes it more human. And I think that's a very distinct challenge to EVE Online, being that a lot of the time you are in your ship. You're not walking around stations. You're not walking around on planets. You are in your ships interacting with a broad universe, and you are immersed in the fantasy, but you're looking through your perspective more than you are seeing yourself. So building that emotional connection is more about helping the players interact with one another.
Very cool. And just to wander off down the side alley for a second, and without digging into any secret juice, can you share, like, there are games like that where the avatar is not human. You could be, you know, piloting a mech or whatever it is. What are some ways that you can create that feeling of humanity with an avatar that's not human? Either one of you.
No worries. Some of the ways you can do it is you can add the ability to express yourself literally, like put stickers or anything like that, or color, make skins, express yourself so that people can see your ship and still see an extension of who you are. Or they can look at your activity log and see what your interests are. Or you can build a collective and still have those human interactions. Alternately, I know that some games will lean into being very careful about the geometry to make sure that the mind is still reading things as human enough to really build a connection. And I think like one IP that really does that really well, get in the boat, Shinji, sorry, Evangelion is very good at pulling on those strings that make you go, oh, it's just human enough for me to connect, but it's just not human enough for me to go. So, yeah, sci-fi in general has a lot of very interesting ways to handle that. And then, you know, you look at Transformers, and that uses human features ad nauseum to really create the expressions and draw people in. But when you're in a ship, it's more about allowing people to express themselves in a multitude of ways.
Add to that, I think, because I think that's a really good point. And one of the main things I think you notice is that behaviors become a huge way of expressing humanity. So in EVE Online, people are free to make choices that aren't logical, don't make sense, or follow a logic that you never would have thought of. And so the world becomes clearly undesigned. People build free ports. People name their stuff ridiculous things. Paint gigantic space cities, ugly colors because it's funny. Get engaged in massive propaganda wars. Create their own efforts for their own alliances that we see inside when you're in a station and you're looking around. You'll see evidence of the human passion and influence on the world around you. And so in that way, it creates a sense of being in a more lived universe when you encounter those things.
Absolutely. And adding to that, actually, when you see a lot of these things developing within the community, sometimes that then informs us where we can take the story next as well.
Yes.
On the official canon side. So it's a relationship that we have. So we have a very human interaction despite the lack of a visibly human interface.
Right. Well, let's touch on that for a second, for 3 seconds here, because we are talking today about narrative design for sandboxes. How much do you listen to the community? How much do you take in from the players, whether it's direct to you or just listening in on what's happening? And Termat, I'll let you lead this one off, buddy.
Yeah, I mean, as much as we can. We have a fantastic community team who we try to foster close relationships with. They've been massively helpful to us in terms of understanding what's going on, what the general sentiment feelings are, but also specific activities that players do. Players do things that we never would have thought of. Recently, for example, we have I think it's, I'm going to forget the number, thousands of systems in what's called wormhole space in EVE Online. And one of our players decided to create and place a character in every one of those systems with the idea that they were doing what's called the Anoikos mapping project. And the community let us know that this person had done this. Exactly, yeah, it's fantastic. And so we got to then recognize that. We brought them into the lore, included them in one of our news articles that we wrote about.
We are always listening. I always, as you know, I had some time in community myself. And I've always thought of community as the player-facing extension of narrative, because without people hearing your story, you don't have a story. So we have a very close relationship with the community team at CCP Games, and we also are always, reading what people say. We may not always have time to respond because we have a million irons in the fire at any given point in time. But you, all of you out there, we are reading and we are listening and we do care. We just don't always have time to respond individually.
Fair enough. All right, well, talking about players, that segues nicely into what I want to talk about next, which is, of course, chaos, because I'm a creature of chaos. How do you strike a balance between a structured world, a big sandbox with guardrails and kill switches and such, with player agency, player choice, the ability for players to have crazy behavior like painting a city ugly colors, but also worse things? Where's the balance there? What do you do? Winter.
Striking the balance. No worries. Striking the balance there is actually a really difficult thing, and it's very different depending on the game you're working on. When it comes to EVE Online, for example, we want the player stories to be central to the experience, and so we will build a highly structured story on our end. But then what we present to the players is extremely limited in scope, so we can say where they take it. And then we can adjust and accommodate to them. So we do a lot of diligent planning on our end to make sure that we are prepared for different ways. And sometimes we're taken completely off guard. Kind of like playing Dungeons and Dragons, when you're like, what are you going to do? Somebody is always going to cast Fireball inside the tavern. some tavern somewhere is going to burn. You're not going to expect it, or somebody's going to be like, you know what? I know you want us to go to the castle and return to the Baron and talk about, everything we did, but what if we want to go into the basement and like overthrow the barony? Like, what is happening? You have to be prepared for that. So we prepare for every case scenario that we can and then adjust accordingly.
Very cool. Tormod, anything to add?
Yeah, I think that was a fantastic answer. I guess the only thing I'd add is, of course, one of the other tricks we have to deal with is people don't always want the same chaos. So one group of people may drive for one piece of chaos, and other people may drive for the opposite kind of chaos. And then trying to find ways to balance that becomes often a matter of either formalizing competition in some manner, so you can actively say this was fair, and you can see that these people who wanted this thing drove the change forwards. Or a matter of just trying to create different spaces for everyone to have their own fun. Because someone may be a massive PvP enthusiast who just wants to hunt down and kill people. Someone might want to go and do a little role play event where they're just like acting out, doing something that's totally non-violent. And I think both those people should be able to have that fun rather than them having to do it on top of each other and then everyone stays around.
Right.
In addition to that, though, there's an interesting phenomenon in games where players will give very pointed feedback, or they'll take things in a very specific direction, and it doesn't necessarily make the best sense from a design angle. Like, people will say they want a certain thing, but it doesn't necessarily make sense within a design. And so you have to temper those expectations at the same time and build that relationship. And that's another side of the chaos where it's just like, I see that they think they want this thing, and I want to acknowledge that. But at the same time, I know the limitations of the engine. I know the limitations of what we can achieve within a cycle. And we need to be realistic around that. So there's also the scope and just basic tool realities to consider along the way. It's a lot of chaos to manage.
That reminds me of actually like a really great interview on writing that Bill Hader gave towards the end of Barry, where he was talking about how when people give you feedback, it's really important to listen to it. When people give you solutions, they're not necessarily always going to be the right solution. There is why they're raising that problem is almost always correct. How they say you should fix it isn't necessarily what you should do next. I think separating out listening from, taking orders from the community are two different things.
That's the kind of gem of wisdom that I'm looking for on this show. So thank you. That's perfect. That's the good stuff.
Such a good show, too. Oh, my God.
Oh, my God.
I love Barry. It's so good. Oh, that ending. Anyone hasn't seen Barry, what are you doing? Go
right now. Well, not right now, but after you're done this.
Right now, like 30 minutes.
Yeah. Perfect. Well done, sir. Have you ever seen, and maybe there's no answer to this, but have you ever seen where that player feedback interaction has allowed you or forced you even to create something that you would not have created otherwise that was special or cool?
I think T should answer this one because he has been in the center of some really amazing designs on EVE Online. So I want to give him a chance to share some of the experiences there.
That's a very kind way to put that. Thank you very much. Yeah, I mean, I think forced isn't the word I would use, because if players do something unexpected and we don't have the ability to respond to it or plus it in some way, that always feels like a shame. If we want to be yes-anding players as much as possible. I would say, though, that we definitely have had times where, for example, we did an event last year called Race for the Heights, where players could choose between 10 different factions within the game to try and take control over 5 very significant space systems. And in our head, we were like, okay, so it's probably going to be the 4 main factions that you can pick as starting, and then this group called the Triglavians, who are extremely popular. And players really picked one of the groups we did not expect, a group called Heathen Combat, and really rocketed them into a really solid position. And one of the four major empires ended up being the only one of the four major empires not to end up with control of those systems. So that was very unexpected. It kind of threw a spanner in the works in the short term, but it also created a lot of fantastic storytelling opportunities that we hope to continue to take advantage of, and was a huge boon for us. By making an unexpected choice, they make the world more interesting, and we get to tell more unexpected and more interesting stories because of that. So it's definitely something I'm really grateful for, to be honest.
Very cool.
It is very cool. I love it. Yes, building on what he said, another side of that is that when we see people connect with a faction that we didn't expect them to, it makes us look at the other factions and go, interesting. Why are people not connecting with these ones? So then we know that in the future we need to analyze where they are and see how we can give everybody something within the space. Keep it compelling. And, you know, with a game like Evil 9, it's 23 years old now. People change. The world changes. And that's something we need to keep in mind. What players want changes. So this gives us a glimpse into that, so we can do our best to adjust and accommodate everyone. Listening
to you guys talk about this, and many other guests talk about similar topics, it always reminds me of running tabletop role-playing games, and especially if you're homebrewing and building your own campaign as you go, you're listening to the people playing, you're paying attention to what they get excited about and adjusting for that. Do you guys ever use tabletop as a prototype tool, as a way to try out ideas, or even just a way to stretch those muscles outside of the workspace? Let's start with T.
I mean, absolutely. I think if the narrative designing for a live service game with sandbox elements, I can't imagine a better practice arena than running tabletop RPG games. The way you learn to yes-hand your players, the way that you get to delight in building a world and seeing how people react to that world is really unique. I mean, in terms of, do we use that as a direct tool when designing? I think less that, but in terms of, as you said, like practicing those muscles and getting ourselves up in those skills. I mean, I just ran a session over last weekend where I did joint world building with the rest of the group using something called the Quiet Year, which if you haven't checked out, you've checked it out. It's the best. I love Quiet Year.
It's very good.
Yeah. And I came away with a bunch of ideas for things that we should be talking about and doing in the office. I'm very excited to bring them up soon.
I love that. I feel like tabletop games in general are a good exercise in finding constraints, because creativity without constraints becomes a mess. Like, I don't necessarily mean that in a bad way. It can be a beautiful mess, but it can still be very messy when you're trying to tell a cohesive story. So tabletop is a great way to see how you can add bumpers to a story to help guide people along without policing them, but then also learning how to improve your creativity and your breadcrumbing throughout. So taking those experiences and applying them to online game design, or even, you know, single player experiences, it translates very well. Only thing to keep in mind is that with an engine, you are not limited to the theater of the mind. You have very solid, concrete limitations that you have to further challenge yourself with. So it's a great exercise, but you still always have to look at the engine and go, oh no, that big idea I have, that big thing I really want to pull off, I can't. But what can I do? So going back and forth between the two can be just a really mind-expanding experience.
That's an excellent point to make. More constraints on the constraints. But it makes my heart grow 3 sizes too big when I hear people talk about using tabletop role-playing games in such a way. That's Makes me happy. So thank you.
Of course.
We're starting to get to the end of the core topic, but I'm looking for a little bit of, I don't know, insight. What are some of the mistakes you see other studios, and without naming anybody or being specific, but what are some of the mistakes studios make when creating narrative design, lore, world building, storytelling for MMO sandbox type games?
If I may kick this one off, I think one of the biggest issues I see is that people don't assume that their players are intelligent enough to put the pieces together. And so they over-explain, they over-design something super simple that players could easily put together themselves. It just takes a lot of experience because, as you know, I've been working in MMOs for over 20 years now. Where does time go? But one of the biggest things you can do is assume that your players are extremely intelligent and play to that. Make them feel intelligent. Let them add the pieces together. And don't just hold their hands the entire way, because that then can become kind of a condescending experience. And I think some of the older eras of MMOs have grown away from that, but some haven't. And yeah, so you still see some of that hand-holdy stuff that kids who play Roblox and stuff today will just go, why? I know what I'm doing. I'm not dumb. But that's my take on it.
I like it.
I think that's so true, and that's actually one of the ways in which it's quite different from TTRPG. Not that TTRPG players are not very smart, talented, and wonderful, attractive human beings, but that when you are telling a story to like 5 people, they can be very smart, they can really be focused, and something may just not click, or they may miss some key clues. When you're telling a story to thousands of people, someone is going to find the terrain you put in. Someone is going to put it together. There will be a team of people working together, which is, going to be 100 or 200 people. And they will spend all of their time trying to crack whatever insinuations and puzzles you've left there for them. And so, yeah, you have to assume that they will not only find it, but they will find it in record time. We've had situations where we dropped rare lore items that breadcrumbed bits of lore, and we thought, okay, yeah, so the players will probably take about 3 or 4 days to get this, and within an hour, they got it.
That is cool. That's so
It is. And one of the other big mistakes I see is that they don't think from a communications standpoint. Humans have a very storytelling-based psyche. Like, our brains are, even math is a story in our heads, and our brains sort it out in a way and say, okay, this is the journey, this is the end, this is the solution. And then this is how it's categorized, and then I can make sense of it. Some studios make the mistake of not having dedicated narrative designers, and you can tell when somehow a story suddenly feels extremely disjointed. And it's not that it's necessarily that they're bad storytellers, it's that they don't know how to connect it to people, or how to use that to drive the intended behavior and build the entire not the entire, but build that emotional resonance between the story and the player to make it cohesive. So studios, you need narrative designers, and I say that with all the love in the world.
Well said. T, anything else to add on that one?
I mean, I think she covered it really well there. I guess the only thing I would add is that I think that one of the mistakes you see is that people will draw hard barriers between player constructed narrative and the narratives they write themselves. Obviously, these things are different and are separate, and headcanon is not the same as what we have officially put out as a corporation. But to separate the player story from the story of the environment, I think, is an unfortunate missed opportunity. They should not be an impenetrable barrier between these two things.
Brilliant. Okay, well, let's bring the core topic to a close here. I have one more question, and then we'll do some fun questions on the way out the door. But so this last question, we're looking for a little bit of wisdom. I'll get you to start this one, T, and then Winter, you can take us home. So here we go. I guess what I'm looking for, are there lessons you've learned the hard way? Like, how have you evolved as a narrative designer inside of this space?
Yes. So, I mean, I came into the games industry with a degree in English and film studies. I have learned everything by being a part of the industry. And a lot of that has meant making terrible mistakes and having someone correct them or seeing how you can do better next time. Every day I learn something else. I'm very lucky to be surrounded by super smart, talented people who let me listen to their cool ideas, which I can learn from. I'd say one of the hard lessons I've learned is use your effort wisely. I think there are things where you think I could put a huge amount of effort into this. I get a lot of people to put effort into this, and I'll make for this really cool, great, dramatic moment. And then maybe not many people see that thing. Maybe it's a live, especially in live storytelling, it might be a live moment that happens. Those moments are great and they're a very important part of the living universe. But if you put the same amount of effort into that you then put into an experience that the entire player base, thousands and thousands of people get to see over and over again, then that felt presence of that story is much greater in the second example. And so it's not a matter of only do one or only do the other, but be aware of the cost and the effort that something's going to put into is going to take to put something out there, and think, how are we going to make sure that people get to hear about this, see this, and experience? I think that's really important.
Very cool.
Absolutely.
Winter, it's your turn.
I think so there are two things here. Since T-shirt is background, as you know, mine is oddly enough primatology in the music industry, which doesn't sound like it has any correlation, but it's surprising how much of human nature is based on the building blocks of primate and prosimian logic. I think some of my worst mistakes early on were thinking that I needed to hold hands, like I mentioned earlier. Thinking that I needed to over-explain or needed to build the world to a point where I was forcing the direction of the story rather than making it a conversation. And that comes from being like, when you're on stage, it's your story and you're letting people interpret it their way, but it's still, it's got a beginning, it's got an end, it's out the door. I think I've grown a lot in that regard, and I've gone, okay, well, how do I appeal to these base behaviors that help us, tap into that speculative side of humanity? And how do I use that to drive behavior and create a conversation? That has been my growth as I've gone from narrative design into narrative direction. And then outside of that, I would just say not being precious. It is so hard to have like the most amazing idea in your head. It's the best idea, and you're in a writer's room full of people, and that everybody has their baby that they just are like, yes. And you're like, sorry, we have to kill all the darlings and look at what actually works within this concept. That is the other hard lesson. It's very easy to get into narrative design and think automatically that you are the idea person, because, growing up, it's kind of like if you're the storyteller, you're guiding that path. But then when you get into it in a corporate sort of position, there's a lot more. It's our story. It's not just your story, it's everyone's story. It's a group effort. And that was one of the biggest pieces of growth for me as well, because early on I came in and I'm just like, yeah, I'm going to tell stories. And then people were like, I've got ideas too. And I'm like, oh, other people. Because, you know, when you're the songwriter, you're doing it yourself. Right. You've got the control. If the record labels haven't stolen your soul yet. Ow.
Ouch.
Well, I mean,
yeah.
Let's be real. But yeah, those are all very big lessons I had to learn along the way, and some of them were very painful, but so important to learn. And I think they made me a better professional along the way.
Well, thank you for sharing them with us. That kind of brings us to the end of the core stuff. There's a philosophical question that I ask everybody who comes on the show. And Winter's had the opportunity to answer it a few times already. So, T, I'm going to throw this one at you. Winter, if you've thought up a new answer, put this in it's been a year now, maybe. I don't even think it's been a year. If you had a new answer, you can tag it on at the end, but I'm going to throw this at you, T. So, bear with me. It's kind of out there. I'm a little weird sometimes. So here it is. In my opinion, there's a magical space that lives at the intersection of obviously story and game, but also improv, comic book writing, movies, music, all these things, where people can just get together, hang out, shared language, a fellowship that just happens. If you agree with me, and not everybody does, but if you do, what would be the magical thread that'll hold a space like that together?
So firstly, I love it when people say the name of the show in the show. So thank you very much for doing that. And I guess my framing, I suppose, would be a little bit different, because I think of games as a type of story. Like, all games are stories. When you play Pong and there's like a little white line and you call it a paddle, you are creating a story about that little white line. When people talk about football, they are telling stories, dramatic stories that they will then go on to tell for decades. And as I mentioned before, when you're playing EVE Online and you say, I am in space, that is a story you're telling yourself. But I think to get to the heart, perhaps, of what you're saying, I think what makes that kind of story so special and so magical is the way that you get to live inside it. And that's something that we're very privileged to get to work on an extreme case of, where many people are getting to live inside same space. I think the nature of interactive storytelling is the response and the feedback it gives you on a sort of moment-to-moment atomic level. You perform an act and the story is different or reveals itself in a unique way because of the act that you performed. And that allows you to be drawn into it and to abandon your barriers in a way that is unique and very special. And every kind of storytelling obviously has its own unique and special characteristics, but I think that's what makes games just light my brain up.
That is a beautiful answer, dude.
I love it.
Thank you. Yeah, that was so good. Winter, have you thought of anything different, or shall we move along?
I don't really have anything different. I just think that story and game are both intrinsically human. You know, it's the connection between the heart, the head, the hands, and the eyes. Just, you know, that natural storytelling mechanism within us and the agency to interact with it.
Love that.
To pull back into your own experience in primatology as well. I mean, play as learning and storytelling between generations is so fundamentally human. It's pre-human.
Oh yeah,
that's a really cool perspective to have.
It is pre-human.
About that one later.
Oh yeah. It's amazing if you have a chance to sit with primates and watch them interact and teach each other and learn from one another and then communicate with you. It's mind-blowing just how natural games come into everything.
Very cool. All right. Well, on that very, very heavy note, I do like to open up a little space before we get to the end for signal boosting. Is there anything you guys want to share that you have been working on or are working on? Or conversely, where can people follow you online to follow your journey? T, you go first, buddy.
I am chronically not online. You can follow me on Blue Sky. I can't even remember my own handle there. I will post this, but I don't post much. And in terms of things, Signal Boost, I mentioned it before, but I'm super into it at the moment. The Quiet Year. If you haven't played it, check it out. Independent game developers creating something truly wonderful and unique.
Yep. Perfect. I'll throw links down in the show notes, in the comments, in the description, so people will be able to find you with a click. It's all good, man. Winter?
Awesome. You can find me on Blue Sky as well. I am more likely to post dog pictures and just random shower thoughts. I always describe myself as a shower thought with legs, because basically that is, you know, the way I live. So yes, if you wish to see my brain being my brain, you know, join me on Blue Sky. Outside of that, together we've been working on Catalyst, the next expansion for EVE Online, which will be releasing on the 18th of November. So don't miss out.
Wonderful. Well, it is time for us to wrap things up and for me to push you out the door. Normally I say push you out into the Canadian cold, but you've moved to Iceland, so you're probably even just as cold as I am. So moving right along, as I push you out the door, I'd like to give the guests the final word. There's two of you, so one of you is going to have to go before the other. So how about we'll reverse it, T, why don't you, and then Winter. So I'm just looking for a little bit of wisdom. It could be craft, it could be life in general, it could be a drink recipe, it could be how to pickle fish. Throw something at me. T first.
Yes. So the person who got me into the games industry, my friend Greg, me and him used to live with his sister. And the greatest piece of wisdom I think we learned living with her is that nobody dies. Games design is so stressful sometimes, and we are so passionate about what we do. But she was a ICU nurse, and what she did was really high stakes, and she managed to maintain a positive, caring attitude that I always found really inspiring. So when it's tough out there, when you're super stressed, when you know, the Jira board is getting on top of you, just remember, nobody dies.
I love that. Honestly, you know, I don't know. As I mentioned, I'm like a shower thought with legs. You know, tofu's really good. That's a piece of knowledge. Also, outside of that, the world is a divisive place, and there's always room for love. So please, listen to stories. Stories matter. Everybody has a story, and we might not always agree with one another's stories, but there's something to take away from everybody's stories, even if you don't get along as people. So that's my other piece of wisdom. Just always listen to what people are communicating, process it yourself, think on it, and integrate it however you will.
And that wraps up another conversation at the corner of story and game. Winter, Termet, thank you for sitting down and sharing your experiences in building story for worlds that don't sit still. You've both given us so much to think about when it comes to designing with players as opposed to at them. And to you, dear listener, thank you for taking your seat at the table. If this episode sparked some ideas or made you rethink what story means in a multiplayer game, hey, pass it along to your friends and colleagues, leave a like or a comment, and come join us over on Discord. Until next time, keep telling stories, playing games, and creating worlds worth getting lost in. Stay safe out there, Wanderer. Your chair will be ready by the fire the next time you stop in at the corner of story and game.